ClimateSync CH8 wiring center, an 8-zone cooling and heating wiring center. We will look at the installation and the cabling of the wiring centers. So first let's have a look at the wiring center itself. On the wiring center we have sensors, room temperature sensors, 8 of them for 8 zones. Floor limit temperature sensors for zones where we need to limit the floor temperature. Then we have at the bottom, we have power supply, 110 to 240 volts AC. We have 8 relays, they're all volt free, so we can use them for different voltages if we need. And we have boiler activation and pump activation. On the left hand side we have 3 Modbus connections. One will communicate with all the aircon indoor units through a CoolPlug to each indoor unit or each group of units. The next Modbus is for optional connection of local controllers, and we have a range of optional local controllers. The third Modbus is to connect to a cooling bridge or CoolMaster for communication with home automation or to use a IOC app with. Now we'll start looking at each part. So let's enlarge a bit the sensor area and discuss the sensors. Here we go. So now we can see all sensors, 16 sensors, sensor options. In this wiring center, as we can see, we have all 8 zones active. We have floor temperature sensors, and some of the rooms, normally this will be rooms with Thimble flooring, where floor temperature limit is required, and you can set what will be the floor limit temperature on the controller, but that will be the setup video. Here we can see that in the lounge we require a floor sensor, in the study, in the master bedroom, in the guest bedroom. These rooms require a floor sensor for floor limit protection. The sensor should be installed touching the flooring, under the flooring. Best to keep it away a bit from the heat source, so we sense the temperature under the floor, under the wooden floor, and not sensing the temperature of the pipes, and then it will stop too early. So to avoid it stopping too early, we would normally put the sensors just under the floor but away from the floor heating source. So for example, if you have water pipes in the floor, don't put the sensor near the pipes, put it a bit away from there. Now we will look at the room temperature sensors. A Thimble sensor on the wall in the room, the best height for it will be 1.4 meters. That's the advised height for it. The sensor should normally not be on an outside wall, as that it may be influenced from the wall temperature. It should be an internal wall in a place where there's no direct sunlight or direct heat source. So for example, if there's a heat source close to the sensor, that's not a good idea. In en-suites, in bathrooms, in places, in rooms where you're not looking to control the room temperature, but to control the floor temperature, you only want to control the floor temperature. In this case, you'll put a floor sensor, but you will position this floor sensor and connect it to the room temperature sensor source, because you are controlling the floor temperature and not just using the floor as a floor limit like we do over here. So these zones are the room are the temperature control, and this is the temperature limit. That's why it's marked here as red, to show that although it's a floor sensor, the sensor is placed in the floor, but it's room temperature control. The cable to use for that is a screened cable, 0.5 to 0.75 millimeter cable, one of the 2 sizes, and that's a screened cable going to each sensor. So this is the sensors. Now let's have a look at the bottom of the wiring center. Okay, so here we can see a bit larger, a bit more, and here we go. So we have Power supply 110 to 240 volt AC. We have 8 zones, so each zone has a heating output. It's a volt-free contact, which means you can have normally open and normally closed connections if you need. So here, for example, we're showing underfloor heating where all the zones are the same voltage as the main voltage, and therefore we daisy chain from the main to the common connection on each relay. And the neutral is direct to each zone. If it's wet underfloor heating, so it's only simply an actuator, then it connects directly. If it's electric underfloor heating under 5 amp, it can connect directly. If it's electric heating over 5 amp, then the relay should only power a contactor, and the contactor should power the electric underfloor heating. Then we have another 2 connections. We'll bring it a bit up to see. So we have a boiler connection and a pump connection. Now again, it's a volt-free contact, so whatever your boiler demands, whether it demands a voltage signal or a volt-free signal, you can use it over here. Standard UK boilers have an option to connect a volt-free contact to it, and therefore you daisy chain C and normally open on this relay between all wiring centers from one to the other, and then you take it back to the boiler. So if any wiring center is calling for the boiler to operate, the boiler will start. In addition, we have another relay that whenever the heat source is demanded and the boiler is on, the boiler demand is on, the pump and valve, which are on the manifold, on the floor heating manifold, will also operate. Sometimes there's no valve, there's only a pump. Sometimes there's no pump and no valve, and it relies on the main pump. But most underfloor heating systems have a pump, and this is connected to power the pump. Where you have electric underfloor heating on some zones, you will dip switch a dip switch on the controller, on the board, and therefore that zone will not activate the boiler and the pump. In cases we have radiators, you will also set that up, and then it will start the boiler but will not start the pump. If you have a zone set as a I/O only, on and off only, without temperature control, if you want it for some fun or anything like this, then you will set up on the setup so that specific zone does not activate the boiler and the pump. So these are the bottom connections. Now let's have a look at the communication between the wiring center and the air conditioning. So as we can see over here, we have a 0.5 millimeter 2-core screened flexible cable which goes to a cooling hub, and then the same cable continues from the cooling hub on a different connection. So if you look at the cooling hub, you will see goes into Modbus, Mod A and B from the wiring center, and then P-bus goes from the cooling hub down to the CoolPlugs by the aircon indoor units. So we can see over here in this wiring center that for the dining room unit they have 2 indoor units. The 2 indoor units are daisy chained on the indoor connection back to a single CoolPlug, and the CoolPlug is then wired to the cooling hub, and we can see over here also the connections that from the indoor unit it goes on this specific unit on P1, P2, as it's a Daikin controller and it's a Daikin CoolPlug. And we have the Modbus daisy chain goes from the P-bus to the P-bus on the cooling hub. So this is a communication with the AC units. Again, the cable will be a 2-core 0.5 millimeter screened cable. Installation of the CoolPlugs can be by the indoor unit, or we can have all the CoolPlugs sitting by the wiring center, and then from each CoolPlug a cable to the indoor unit, as long as it's a CoolPlug that connects to a wired controller and the indoor unit, not a CoolPlug that connects directly on the PCB board of the indoor unit with a small special plug. If it is, then it must be by the indoor unit. If it connects to a wired controller and it's a 2-core cable or a 3-core sometimes by some brands, then it will be connected either by the indoor unit or by the wiring center. If you do it by the wiring center, then instead of daisy chaining the indoor units, you will have a cable from each CoolPlug, 2-core cable or 3-core in some cases, most cases a 2-core, from the CoolPlug to the indoor unit. And then all the CoolPlugs sit by the wiring center. And the advantage of that is that when you position them by the wiring center, when you need to diagnose later, you don't need to go to different indoor units to look at what's happening over there and open the covers. You just have it all by the wiring center. So in a case where you're going to put the CoolPlugs by the indoor units, you do a daisy chain of a 2-core 0.5mm screened cable to all the indoor units, to all the plugs on the indoor units. And if you have the CoolPlugs by the wiring center, you're going to do the cable from the CoolPlug at the wiring center to each individual unit, a separate cable. Connection to the CoolMaster or cooling bridge will be a 2-core 0.5mm screened cable, which will go between all the wiring centers on line 3 back to the cooling bridge or CoolMaster. If you have a VRF or VRV system, it's always recommended to install a CoolMaster and not a cooling bridge, as you will connect the CoolMaster also to the VRF bus line, which will allow fault finding through the CoolMaster later. So that could be very useful. And also the CoolMaster has a touch screen, which allows to do some local control from the touch screen on the CoolMaster. Optional room controllers. There's an option to connect to the middle line 2 Modbus connection, again with a 2-core 0.5 screened flexible cable, daisy chaining to all the room controllers. In addition, you need to provide to the room controllers, if it's climate pads, it will be a 5-volt daisy chain. So there will be a 5-volt transformer near the wiring center with another daisy chain of a 2-core 0.5mm screened cable going between all climate pads. If it is the budget controllers, then the power supply to all the controllers will be a high voltage supply. For Europe and the UK, that will be 220 to 240 volts. For the US, that will be 110 volts. That's for the budget controllers, and that will be in addition to the communication, the Modbus daisy chain that goes to those controllers. Here at the bottom of the wiring center diagram, you can see the different cable instructions. So power supply, near each ClimateSync wiring center, you will have a power supply for the wiring center. Normally that would be a fuse spur near the wiring center, 110 to 240 volt for the wiring center, and that will connect as we showed right over here. The next one will be a 13 amp, a standard power socket, and that's for the cooling hub. So this will be the cooling hub that goes near the wiring center, and this uses a transformer which connects the standard socket. The CoolMaster, which will sit at the AV rack, will also require a standard socket to use a transformer that connects and powers the CoolMaster. We need one connection to the local internet connection. So one connection to the local switch for the CoolMaster, and 2 connections near the wiring center. One will go for the wiring center itself, which will connect over here, and another Ethernet connection to the cooling hub. That will allow diagnostics and fault finding and some other features. Room and floor temperature sensors. So this could be a 2-core 0.75 screened cable, flexible screened cable, or 0.5 flexible screened cable. Floor sensors should be placed near the flooring material, but not near the water pipes. This is to avoid the floor temperature limit reaching while it's not really reaching. So sometimes if you put the sensor too close to a hot pipe, way before the floor temperature reaches the floor limit temperature, the pipe already reaches that temperature and will stop the heating for that room. So it's better to install it close to the flooring, just under the flooring, away from the pipes, or away from the heat source if it's an electric underfloor heating. Room sensors, the best is to place them on internal walls, not on external, as they will be influenced from external wall temperature. So on internal wall temperatures, the recommended height is 1.4 meters from the floor, in a central room location, away from any heat source or direct sunlight. The Modbus daisy chain, as we said, from between the ClimateSyncs to the CoolMaster will be a 0.5 millimeter flexible stringed cable. The ClimateSync to CoolPlugs, as we said, it's the same type of cable that goes to all the CoolPlugs if the CoolPlugs are by the indoor units. Between the CoolPlug and the indoor unit, it will be normally a 2-core 0.75 millimeter flexible cable. On Fujitsu old systems, that will be a 3-core. Midea, it may be a 3-core, so have a look on the specific wiring diagram for that specific indoor unit. Heating actuators, boiler and pump, as we explained on the connections over here. CoolMaster to VRF communication, 2-core 0.75 millimeter flexible screened cable. That's the daisy chain to all the VRF outdoor units. That is very important, and this will allow also diagnostics. Thank you for watching.